Welcome to the Sustainable Production Forum. Hath squile each tenoyup, toits tanakquian quinshaman, cease quian sna, an hath in squalowin, an wanoxt in squalowin teetseeds. Welcome everybody. It lifts my heart to welcome you to these ancestral lands and waters of the Huamathquiam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish Old Olcameo. I am Squamish and Stalo, and I'm standing on these shorelines where the salt water meets the shoreline and comes back into the forest with ancient trees, ancient cedar trees, ancient fir trees, and ancient maples. Welcome, OCM.
It's our job at CBC Radio-Canada to report on what we, as Canadians, care about. Politics, culture, sports, entertainment. But there's a bigger picture, something Canadians care about even more: the environment. It's what all the rest of it hinges on. We wouldn't be here without forests, wildlife, and oceans. Stories on the environment often have the way of making us feel powerless and small. Who are we against a hurricane? Who are we against a wildfire? Who are we against a changing climate? We are more powerful than it seems. So we're not just going to report on the environment. We're going to take action and help preserve all the things we care about. We've looked at how we can do better and set some goals for 2026. And that's just the beginning. Our ultimate goal is carbon neutral. As we move towards zero, we will report on our progress. Keeping you informed is our job, after all.
Ontario's film and television industry is committed to a sustainable future. The Ontario Green Screen Initiative is a public-private partnership of industry leaders that have assembled to provide the tools, relationships, resources, and educational opportunities required to make real environmental change. Visit ontariogreenscreen.ca for more information about how you can take part.
Welcome to SPF 22. I'm Zena Harris, President of GreenSpark Group and Creative Director of the Sustainable Production Forum.
Hi, I'm Melanie Windle, Executive Producer of the Sustainable Production Forum. Thank you for being here with us. I'd like to thank SEISMOLOGIST for that wonderful traditional welcome. I'm tuning in from the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani, the Tsuut'ina Nation, the Nakota Nations, the Métis Nation Region 3 in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta.
Today, I'm tuning in from the traditional territories of the Puyallup and Coast Salish peoples of the Puget Sound area. This virtual event is coming to you from around the globe. And if you are unsure of whose traditional land you are watching us from, you can visit native-land.ca or indigenousworld.org to learn more. Those links should be popping up in the chat shortly. Please share with us in the chat where you are tuning in from.
We are so excited to welcome you back to the 7th Annual Sustainable Production Forum. It's a delight to gather again. For the better part of 2022, Zina and I have been discussing your pain points, your successes, and figuring out how we can have an impact and move the needle in decarbonization in our sector.
We have been meeting with leaders, experts, change makers, and disruptors for the last 6 weeks, having incredible conversations, and we are excited to share them with you throughout the month of October.
If you have occasion to be in Vancouver, Toronto, or New York City, don't forget to check out our in-person events. Please introduce yourself. We love seeing the community grow.
Something special about SPF is that it is a gathering place for stakeholders across the entertainment industry, and we are very grateful for the support, collaboration, and allyship we have developed with our partners.
The SPF 22 lead partners are presenting partner, Real Green, Creative BC, Motion Picture Production Industry Association. Platinum partner, MBS Canada. Signature partners, CBC Radio-Canada and Telefilm Canada. Please visit our website or check out our sponsor page on the event platform to get to know all our partners and vendors.
A bit of housekeeping. Please take an opportunity to engage with the community board, to post or take our polls during sessions. Say hello to our partners and vendors. Please help us gather important measuring points by participating. Join the social media conversation by using the hashtag SPF22.
Hey, welcome to SPF 22, and welcome to this session called The Daily Scoop on Environmental News, presented by signature partner CBC Radio-Canada. Prioritizing solutions-based journalism, facts, and context help us focus on sustainable pathways forward. Join us in this dynamic panel to learn how today's leading journalists find this balance when writing about the climate and inspiring action in our communities. Leading today's chat is Grace Lee, senior producer at Reuters. Joining us to share their insights and experiences are Laura Lynch, host of What on Earth at CBC, Johanna Wagstaffe, senior meteorologist and seismologist at CBC Vancouver, Camille Vernet, video journalist at CBC Radio-Canada. All right, let's dive in.
Thank you so much for joining us for the Daily Scoop on environmental news. I'm joined here by Laura, Johanna, and Camille. And I'm just going to first off go around. Oh, and I'm Grace. I'm going to first off go around and just get our panelists to introduce themselves. So why don't we start with you, Laura?
Okay, I'm Laura Lynch. I'm the host of What on Earth. It is a weekly CBC radio program as well as a podcast that focuses on climate change and particularly on solutions. It started just over 2 years ago and has grown from being a summer replacement series at half an hour to what it is now, which is a permanent show that is an hour long. And we thought at the start that we would have maybe only a few topics to talk about, but man, there are so many things to talk about that we just keep going and going. And it's been really wonderful and a challenge to be doing this program.
Amazing. Johanna?
I'm Johanna Wagstaffe. I'm a meteorologist and science reporter with CBC Vancouver and CBC News, the network. And I have been, a working scientist for CBC for quite some time, but because weather is how we experience climate change, I have been finding ways and people and projects to be part of that help communicate the story of climate change. So there's always something exciting, whether it's trying to connect the extreme weather events we see around the world to climate change, trying to connect our local weather to climate change, working on podcasts or new series. It's continually more a part of our daily news coverage as time goes on.
And we have our reporter in the field. Camille, do you want to tell us where you're joining us from and, you know, what you do?
Yes, so I'm a video producer for Radio Canada for the digital team. And what I do is shoot, edit, and I write my own piece. So I was on a video shoot for the last 5 days. And yesterday our plane, we had some issues with the plane. So I'm in Bella Bella today in Heiltsuk Nation territory, First Nation territory. So this is what you see behind me is the big house here. And but it's good because this is a climate change story. So it's going to be interesting to talk about the experience in the field.
Great. So why don't we kind of dive right in? And I just wanted to personally ask each and every one of you, why environmental journalism? What drew you to this field? And it seems like maybe a few years ago, people considered it a niche. You know, it's something not a lot of journalists were reporting on, and now it's grown into something that's grander. And I think people came to this realization that no, a lot of the top stories around the world have direct links to environmental journalism now. So how did you get into this field? Let's start with you, Laura.
Well, the fact is that for many, many years, I wasn't focused on climate change and environment. I'm certainly the oldest of everyone here, and I've had a fairly long career. I was a foreign correspondent for a number of years. I was a political correspondent on Parliament Hill. I was a reporter in Vancouver. But if you go way, way back to when I was a wee little cub reporter, I was actually covering the environment back then in Vancouver for the local newsroom. And I think that probably grew out of being born and raised in North Vancouver and just being outside all the time. The forest was my playground. And so I just sort of came to automatically care about all of that and was reporting on it for quite a long time. And then this opportunity came around. I pitched the show on climate change 2 years ago. We didn't really have anything like it on the CBC. And then the pandemic hit. So things got delayed a little bit, but it feels like coming home to me in more ways than one. I'm physically back home in North Vancouver, and I'm back where I started, in a sense, in my journalism, which is covering the environment and covering climate change now. So it all just, it's like full circle for me.
Was that a hard pitch when you first came up with that idea to do a whole show on the environment? Did the editors at CBC push back, or was there already interest?
You know what they say, timing is everything. And I remember having a coffee with the boss, Kathy Perry, and sitting down with her and saying, we should do a show about climate change. And she immediately said, it has to focus on solutions. And I said, I know, you're right. She said, okay, go do a pilot. So the timing was right. They were thinking about it. They just wanted to hear a pitch. And then we started working on the pilot and everything went from there. So I don't know, had it been a year before, would they have been as receptive to it? Certainly, if it had been a year later, they would have been saying, why don't we have a climate change show? Because it has become much more a topic of daily news and daily conversation. But we just hit it right in that particular spot. And we had a lot of support from the bosses who saw the need for this, and from the audience who really appreciated what we were doing. So I just feel really grateful for having that all sort of fall into place.
Great. And Johanna, you are kind of the expert in this field and you've done podcasts on this. What drew you to climate?
Yeah, I love hearing about everyone's, different entry points into this. And I didn't even know that full backstory, Laura. So yeah, I love this. Yeah, for me, I came at it from sort of a science entry point. My background is science. My undergrad is in geophysics. I wanted to understand everything about how the world beneath our feet works. And I've always been interested in meteorology. I have my pilot's license, and through getting my pilot's license, having to do some basic forecasting, I realized that I wanted to understand everything above our heads too when it comes to how the world works. So after my undergrad in geophysics, then I did an atmospheric physics postgrad. And through all of that, I mean, I loved living in the academic world, but I also knew that it wasn't where my joy was. My joy was sharing my passion for the things that I was learning and seeing how all of these different things fit together. And I knew that I wanted a career in communications, whether that was working for a science journal, a university. In the end, I sort of ended up falling into a very behind the scenes job at the CBC Weather Center in Toronto about 15 years ago now. And that was it. That was the open door into the world of science communication. But from the very beginning, from my undergrad in geophysics and understanding these huge, millions of years processes and seeing how quickly the human forced changes are happening, that contrast right from the beginning, I knew that I wanted climate change to be where I was taking this conversation. But it has been a journey, and this word shall only be named once, but going from the weather girl to a science reporter has been a journey. I know, I'm preaching to the choir with Camille and Laura. It's been a journey to get the focus on climate change, and I'm so pleased that it is now the focus for almost all of our stories. The intersection is amazing, and so it's happening, whether it's too late or fast enough, but it's really exciting to see it take off now.
Amazing. And Camille, you're out in the field right now and you're doing a climate story. Tell us a little bit about your experience reporting on this subject and what you're out there doing now, maybe.
Yeah, so today, well, I'm doing multiple stories, so it could be a bit of a long story, but in Helsinki Nation, I'm doing a story on the climate action team, who actually had an oil spill in a few years back, and they decided to change a lot of things because they were depending on diesel to heat their homes. So they installed heat pumps all across different houses. They're about, I think, 75% done. Maybe don't quote me on that because I did the interview a few days ago. So, and also they want to get solar panels in the community. So I went to film some of that for the story. But we're also doing a story on in Klemtu about the spirit bear and how they're getting protected thanks to the work of the First Nation there, the Kitasoo First Nation. So that's what I'm doing, which is incredible. It's I never thought I was gonna be doing this. Like this has been unbelievable for me the last couple of years. I never wanted to be a journalist or to work in the newsroom. That was not the plan. As a kid, I was passionate about the environment, and I wanted to be a documentary filmmaker, and had my National Geographic tapes, and that's all I wanted to do. So, long story short, like it took many years to get where I am now. But basically, I started my own production company, but I needed money, so I worked at CBC as a video editor just to make ends meet. And I was I'm just saying hello. So yeah, just and then I was working on my pitches about the environment, and I wasn't sure how I was gonna make it happen in this industry because the documentary industry is very difficult. And if you want to talk about climate change, it's like, okay, how I'm gonna get a broadcaster to want to talk about this. And at one point somebody said, oh, just why don't you pitch something to CBC Radio Canada? And I did, and Radio Canada was interested in the story. And they were like, okay, when can you do it? Like you could leave tomorrow. That it was a story on the orphan wells in Fort St. John. So the fact that I could do the story like now, like leave tomorrow, basically for me, I was like, we need to talk about this now. I don't really have time. Like build a company and to wait for 10 years for someone to like one of my pitches. If somebody wants me to go out there and talk about this, I'll just jump on a plane and I'll do it. So and now I'm full-time at Radio Canada and they seem to like my pitches because I'm only throwing pitches on the environment. So I slowly just got into doing those. And now we have a big project called Nature Humaine that's about, climate solutions and feature story on community making a difference.
Amazing.
Can I ask Camille one question? I have to know, did you see the spirit bear?
We didn't. We didn't. No, but it's still like everything we saw orcas, we saw whales, we saw grizzly bears, like 7 grizzly bears, like eagles, name it. So we decided that the spirit bear didn't want to show itself because he didn't want to make it about himself. He was like, no, this got to be about the community. It has to be about everything that the bear is kind of protecting a lot of different things, because the spirit bear is like, have you lost me?
No, oh no,
yeah,
you're back.
Sorry, my connection is a bit unstable.
Spirit bear was coming in. The spirit bear was talking about me.
Yeah, exactly. He came to talk to us. But yeah, so I don't know where it stopped, but I think it's about the community and the forest and so many different things.
Okay, well, while we're on that topic of you being able to pitch the stories you love and care about, can you tell us a little bit about what kind of pitches have been successful? What is the appetite, and what kind of climate stories have you been able to successfully get out there?
So what I've been pitching are more of feature stories where I spend time on the field, and I spend time with the people I interview, and that's been a bit of a challenge sometimes to to do that, but it works because when I did the first pilot story, it was about, I wanted to do something about the decline in salmon in BC. And we have hundreds of stories on the studies and all that things, and we can look at how many people view those stories. We have all that data. And when I did a story on the creek walkers, so sort of turning it into the human side of that issue, and those people who throughout the years, because they've been doing this for a very long time, have seen the decline in salmon, and they know that the communities are depending for their livelihood on the salmon. So so I did that creek water story. That was sort of the pilot project, and the response was really great. We had like good engagement. A lot of people looked at the stories, and so it was a really big win. And I could show with the numbers to my to the producers, and that it worked. Like that kind of story really engage with people.
Right. And Laura, how about you? Are there any common topics or themes that seem to resonate with people when you're talking about the environment or climate change?
So the audience has been slowly growing for the show, and as it's grown, we find that, so part of the way we gauge it is social media reaction, when people are really paying attention. And I'd say that ones that people feel almost personally, if it's something like electric vehicles and where you get where you mine the materials for batteries, that people get kind of worked up about that. Because we're not a science show per se. We certainly do science. We do a really wide range of issues. So we've done politics. We've done the federal election through a climate change lens, and people get very worked up about that as well. So I'd say, and then people get very touched in a really good way by young people, because we try to get a lot of young people on the program because they're inheriting this mess, and so what they have to say can be honestly very powerful. And also many Indigenous guests come on the program because their worldview is more and more considered to be so critical to finding a way through all of this. So yeah, our audience is very committed. They really do care, and we hear from them a lot. which reinforces the idea that we can pretty much choose to do whatever we want to do. And so we think about everything. Like this past weekend, we did a segment about climate change comedy. You think about climate change and having a laugh, but we actually had a comedian on, an American comedian who does climate change stand-up. And he was pretty funny.
Oh, wow.
So,
I
so
like
you
that one. That was awesome.
and it's, it's great to be able to have a laugh, because so much of what we talk about isn't always easy to listen to. So it's been really fun and amazing to see how many parts of it gets into every single part of all of our lives. And I think people just really get surprised by what we do every week.
And Johanna, speaking of the science side of things, how do you make that balance between trying to make these stories that you do personable and easy to understand versus trying to get those scientific facts out that might not be as easy for your audience to grasp?
I think about this all the time. I have been thinking about this, since the very beginning, and it's constantly changing. I think as our audience, the science literacy for everyone, I think, is increasing. So I'm constantly learning myself and changing those tactics. But I will say, when I started, again, I know Camille and Laura, you were here, from feeling these same battles. It was, for me, just trying to get any climate change story out into the newsroom at the beginning, and coming at it from a science perspective. If I can just get a minute on News Network about a new, melting ice cap story, even if it wasn't appealing to the bosses, it was sort of like, I'll do this thing for you if we can get a minute on a science story, even if it's doom and gloom. I feel like, even 10 years ago, especially, it was still about convincing the world that this was a crisis. And so just making that as much a part of my daily other work that I could, whether I was doing the forecast and just trying to add climate change into every night, if this was the seasonal, but remember that seasonal's changed over the past 4 decades. It used to be a lot warmer in the 60s. So just trying to integrate climate change into every forecast and trying to get that little bit of science storytelling into every newscast and every platform. But it has definitely shifted, and I will always stay true to the science, and I'll always think there's a story to tell with the numbers. But as Laura said, it has become personal now. And for me, it's finding those natural disasters. For us in British Columbia, the back-to-back wildfire seasons was really a turning point, I think, for British Columbians. It was when, they knew somebody who had been out of their home for weeks on end. The summer of smoke that meant, no one could do anything outside. It became very personal for a lot of people for the first time. And the climate change conversation is now a part of people's daily conversations in a way that it never has before. And I'll never forget, after those first back-to-back wildfire seasons, I think 2017 and 2018, for the first time, we had more calls into the newsroom from people wanting us to talk about the connection to climate change than we did from climate trolls. That was the tipping point that I will never forget. But I think, speaking to the change in science reporting, I think the science and the facts are always going to be important because there's a sense of empowerment there. But doing it in a way that people feel like they can take ownership of that information and do something with it is, people want the carrot now. People want to know what they can do and feel empowered by solutions. So yeah, my reporting has definitely changed.
So that's an interesting point that you touched on, solutions-based climate reporting. Do you have any tips on that, or any kind of know-how that you've developed on making sure that it doesn't feel too much like just all doom and gloom, but instead giving people something tangible that they can act on?
I think speaking to young people has really helped. In the past couple of years, I was working on a radio series this past summer on just really small solutions, something that one person can do. And it was hearing from, mainly young people that, yes, we need big systemic change. That is undeniable, across all industry and around the world. But I think learning that it's so important to realize that something that you do and that is personal to you will make a difference. And I think the big one also is realizing that that doesn't look the same for everyone. You know, it can be tailored to your personality and your skills. And that also isn't confined to just science. You don't have to be a scientist or an environmentalist or a climate change scientist. You know, your background in arts and music and coding and video games, like there's an entry point for everyone into climate solutions. And that's not only exciting, but that's going to help us find solutions in ways that we'd never thought of before by bridging these different universes, the multiverse.
There's an amazing Canadian academic in the United States, and she's actually also, I think she's advising the Biden government. Her name's Leah Stokes, and we've had her on before. And her solutions is to talk about it. You don't have to, you can't do anything else, just talk about it, and talk about it all the time and drive that awareness of the situation. And all, that people took to heart when we had her on the program, because there are things that everybody can do, like Johanna said. We also had an Australian hairdresser who had turned her salon into a teaching lab. They have their clients in the chair and they're talking to them about climate change. And she studied it. She met with academics to learn about it. So they're all out there. People are doing things, and it can be big, it can be scientific, it can be small, but that sense that people can have, that idea that I can make a difference, I think helps them to deal with their own anxiety and fear about the situation.
Right. And how about you, Camille? I mean, do you have any experience kind of doing solutions-based climate reporting, and how does that shape the stories that you tell?
Yeah, I like to focus on the hope and the solutions. So a lot of what I do is about solutions. And one thing I've noticed is in First Nation communities are really working very hard to make a difference in that regard. And I think they, you know, they rely a lot on the environment just to feed themselves and things like, and they know their land, they know their territory really, really well. So that's something when I started looking at solutions, I didn't really, you know, I wasn't focusing on First Nation, but it became clear to me that they were like at the forefront of the fight, and there are leaders really, and sometimes like the science was catching up on what they already knew. So I've been doing a lot of stories in those communities, but you know, I can also do things. You know, I'm always interested in energy stories. So whether it's, you know, geothermal projects or I do really a variety of different things, and also it can be, you know, climate champions in Vancouver, so it could be smaller project that have. But I think it's solutions, and even if it's a solution that's like a technology or an innovation, I always want to make it about the humans that are fighting for it and are trying really hard to make a difference. So I always put it back at the community level and try to show that, yeah, people can make a difference. There's still hope. Like when you fall into despair, I think we've all had those moments where we're like, can we make a difference? But every time I go out in the community and I talk to people, I feel a little bit more hopeful. I think it's now also we have to talk about regulations and how the government needs to act on those things, and that it cannot only be about people wanting to make a difference. Like the government also has to make big efforts, and I think you know, like I did a story on cruise ship industry, and you know, one thing that was important is talking about what other, you know, to go into the solution-based thing. I looked at what other governments like were doing, even in Norway. I looked at Norway, what they were doing, and just gave them a call. So when I do a story, I always try to, even if it's not so much, you know, I try to look at what other people are doing elsewhere as well. I think that helps in the solutions, if that makes any sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I like how you talked about hope, because it can get very daunting, right? I'm sitting in my newsroom, I'm watching unprecedented heat waves in Europe. I'm seeing a heat dome in BC. I'm seeing flooding in the south of the US. There are just so many stories that are tied to climate change and they just all seem awful. And it seems like we're sitting on a ticking time bomb. Do any of you have advice for our viewers on how to kind of deal with that despair and make sure that you don't get, too caught up in feeling hopeless?
I think that, as we sort of alluded to, we've all sort of felt levels of climate anxiety, and I've really felt it the past year. And I don't think in the moment I realized that's what it was. And it took me taking a step back and talking to other people in this world and realizing that I was feeling that climate anxiety. It also makes me sad to hear how many young people are feeling climate anxiety. Young kids, I didn't feel that growing up. That wasn't one of the many layers of pressure, but that definitely exists now. But I think to that end, speaking to different experts on this topic, finding that one thing that you can do, no matter how small, but something that matches your personality and matches your skill set and gives you that sense of empowerment, is actually a solution to climate anxiety. And it is that feeling of despair and hopelessness that feeds that climate anxiety. And I think, without going too far down another rabbit hole, there's a lot of new research that shows the doomism, the climate doomism is exactly the path to doing nothing and to continuing a status quo. And there's some arguments, some academic arguments that on the fossil fuel side, that's the ideal world, is that we all feel doomism and helplessness. But I think talking about it and finding communities and groups to share our anxieties with and share ideas about how you can get involved in a unique way is a solution. And that feeling, I realized that this is my outlet, telling these stories and finding new ways to keep that conversation going is my outlet for climate anxiety. And if I didn't work in this world, I wonder, where I would find that and what would suit my personality. But I felt much more, despite everything that we've seen in the past year with extreme disasters around the world, I felt more hopeful now than I ever have.
Well, that's nice to hear. Laura, how about you? Did you have anything to add?
Well, I echo everything Johanna said. The other thing that I would tell people is just to acknowledge it. Don't pretend it's not there, and then use that as fuel to find your own path to doing something. My goodness, am I ever lucky that I have the program, because that is my own answer to coping with it for a lot of the time. And that the fact that I am hearing from people every week who are working in so many different ways to do things big and small is great for me. And we talk about these people's own anxiety and why they're doing what they're doing and what their motivation is. It's all out there, and I just advise anybody to just scratch the surface a little bit, and you'll find it. I've talked to people who have left jobs, traditional jobs in Google or academia, to go and work on the front lines of climate change. Those are big things. And then there's scientists who are doing amazing things out there in geothermal and other kinds of energies. But it doesn't have to be that big. If you're just out there trying to do something, trying to make a difference, it can soothe those feelings of anxiety. And you've also usually become part of a community, which can also help.
Amazing. I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that, since we're in a room full of journalists, that environmental journalism can be a risky profession. And we have journalists around the world who risk their lives to bring us stories that really matter and have a big impact. And just wondering if any of you have ever felt any danger or have been threatened while reporting on the climate here in Canada?
I get some nasty emails sometimes.
Yeah, Laura and I are often trading, like, have you heard from this guy? Have you heard from this girl? Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
But I guess part of the reason that being the pandemic is that I haven't been out there that much, quite frankly. And I don't think I've faced any what I would consider to be real threats, certainly not on the scale that I faced when I was a foreign correspondent and going into war zones. So I have a different sort of a scale perspective on that sort of thing. By and large, yes, I still hear from climate skeptics or trolls, as Johanna rightly calls some of them. But to me, that's par for the course. I've been around a long time. I've got a pretty thick skin. And the fact is they're a small minority.
And how do you deal with those skeptics? Do you respond to them, or do you just say, hey, you know, I just got to focus on the bigger picture instead?
Well, if it's a personal attack, I'm not going to respond to that. There's just no percentage in doing it. And the ones who are climate change deniers, equally, there's nothing I'm going to say to them that is going to change their minds. So they're wanting to just say what they wanted to say. I don't think they're even expecting a response from me. So it's often just best to just let it be. I've never been in a situation where someone has confronted me personally and argued with me about it. Maybe that'll come someday if we ever get out in the community and do a live climate change event, and I'll handle it then. But yeah, so far it's fine, and I'm not going to feed that kind of denialism with a response.
Right. And how about you, Camille, in the field? Have you ever come across climate deniers, or, you know, have you felt the pressure of trying to convince them? How is it for you?
Not really. Like, even when I talk to people in the forestry industry or in the, you know, in the oil and gas industry, I always try to, you know, talk about how they feel about this also. So I always come with I don't try to force, you know, anything onto them. So you know, you have to respect everybody's point of view. And when you're interviewing someone now, it's not really the time to start arguing about different things. I'm also, you know, often alone on the field, and I'm a very small person. So I don't think I'm a challenge. Nobody wants to fight with me. They leave me alone. They're all like helping me out, really.
That's good to hear.
I've been very lucky. I know I have colleagues who had like a lot of problems in the field, especially, you know, when they're reporting. So I know it's happening, and I do feel like with talking more and more about climate change and all the pressure it's going to have on our society, that I don't think our job is going to get any easier, and that we are going to be, you know, things are going to get, I think, harder and harder. But so far I've been very lucky, and I've had people that are really nice and actually helpful. But maybe, yeah, it's also that I don't have a big cameraman with me, so there's really, or you know, there's nothing you can.
Well, that's good, but still stay safe out there. It can get a little tricky sometimes, because I used to do that one woman VJ thing too, and you know, it happens in a blink of an eye.
My safety is more about managing my own expectations of what I can do in one day. Like how much driving I can do, how much filming I can do, and maybe, you know, pacing myself. I have to pace myself because I think I can do a lot.
Try to do too much.
So, you know, we have to be careful also of not burning, you know, not doing burnouts, because we are working really, really hard. Well, I think, you know, like everybody in the newsroom is. So, and for me to be able to do those stories, it means there's other people doing like daily news and working also very, very hard every day. So I can be in the field for multiple days doing the stories that I'm doing here. So it's a team effort, really.
It is. And speaking of getting these stories out there, do all of you feel like the way you report on the environment has changed over the years? And if so, what do you kind of envision environmental journalism looking like in the next few years? I will open the floor for anyone to answer.
I mean, I sort of alluded to that big change, you know, starting from just trying to get climate change a part of any story on any platform. And now, I mean, we don't, on a large scale, we don't need buy-in anymore. We don't, it's nice that I think we're past that point. And so the story changing, I think the storytelling has shifted from trying to convince audiences to now what can be done and is what we're doing working. And, you know, are on the science front, or any of these new science studies helping us to hone what the vision of the world in the future, so that can help us refine our solutions. And for me on the science front, that's sort of been the shift. You know, I'm still interested in the science stories about the melting ice cap and the change in the timeline, but instead it's the minutia of the, you know, it's actually going to melt in 30 years rather than, 40 years. And that might not sound like much, but that informs policy. And so I think for me, it's important to try and show our audiences why the science is still important and why that is powerful and that informs policy and ultimately decisions and hopefully spurs action. But going back to the solution side of it, I think recently I've been trying to find ways to put that science into solutions. So, you know, places around the world, Camille, as you were saying, you know, in Norway, places around the world where they've implemented things sooner or faster or in different ways, or there have been collaborations faster than we've been doing in Canada. Can we find, does the science show us that that's working? And then again, that will convince us. And I do think that, you know, one of the very small silver linings with the pandemic is that not everyone, but generally, you know, people I think are more science literate. And I think we understand what modeling means. We understand uncertainties in science. And I think people now understand that uncertainties doesn't necessarily mean we don't know that it exists, but it's these details that will help us. So my reporting has changed as the science literacy has changed. And I think that's really gone up in the past couple of years.
That's interesting, Johanna, that you've seen that shift. I think over the last couple of years of doing the program, we've just opened up things increasingly widely to consider different aspects of the climate change conversation. You know, we talk about what's going on in the courts with climate change court challenges. We talk about refugees, climate refugees, and what that's going to mean. What I think is going to come on more strongly in the next little while is, at least I hope so, because it's not really something we can tackle on our show, is investigative journalism. And by that, I mean the accountability that needs to happen with government, with industry, with companies. And I know that there's a commitment to doing that at the CBC. And I think that that's going to be a very important component of all of this. And so that will sort of drive a lot of the other journalism that gets done, I think, in the next few years. And unfortunately, the other thing I think is going to become more prevalent in the conversation is conflict that has been driven by climate change. And that comes in the form of disasters, food shortages, social unrest. Those are all things that you probably are going to see more and more of. And it's going to come to the point where I think pretty much every single news story of the day, if not 80, 90%, is going to have a climate change link to it, or some part of it will be rooted in climate change.
Absolutely.
That's so interesting. Yeah, sorry, it's a lot of that was exciting. I am really excited about what you said about the investigative, but yeah, already I'm starting to see a shift in all of our stories. No longer do you just have to find that one scientist who says in the middle of a piece, and this is likely connected to climate change. Like we're moving beyond that now. And I like that we don't have to state those facts. I mean, it is just part of every story. And now it's why and what, rather than stating that same sentence over again.
Yes, definitely. I feel the same way. But and going back to the investigative journalism, I think that's also very important, and acknowledging that takes a lot of time. I feel like I'm always negotiating for time more than anything else. But it's so important that we do those. That I feel this is time that's invested really well, and I hope that's gonna. I hope that we'll be doing more and more of those.
Great. And I had another kind of open question for everyone. In case there are any aspiring journalists watching, do you have any advice for people who want to get into this field and start reporting on climate?
I guess well, you decide whether you want to approach it from a scientific perspective, like Johanna has, but don't be limited by that. You can, as I said, you can tackle it from all sorts of angles. And I think it's probably a pretty good time to consider doing that and pitching those kinds of stories, because as Camille said, there is a receptiveness to those kinds of ideas and getting those stories out there. I do know in our own newsroom in Vancouver, there are really great younger journalists who are focusing in on and who care about climate change and who have stories to tell. And increasingly, I think that those kinds of journalists will be in high demand. But at the same time, I think given the industry right now, it's probably best maybe to hedge your bets a little bit and have all kinds of things in your quiver so that you can do all sorts of journalism while sort of leaning towards this in the future. But just read as widely as you can, listen to podcasts, including Johanna's podcasts, they're very good, and watch everything that you can and learn, and keep lists and ideas about climate change stories. We do have on CBC Radio, we have a radio documentary unit that accepts pitches. And if they take your pitch, then they will work with you on producing a documentary. And we are one of the shows that benefits from that. We have documentaries that are coming out of that unit. So there's opportunities. You just have to go looking for them.
How about you, Johanna?
Yeah, I would, everything that Laura said, I totally agree with. And maybe just in this new world, I mean, we are in a bit of a wild west when it comes to how the future will be consuming news. And, as a public broadcaster, we sort of have a responsibility to experiment in those different realms. So it's been exciting to try out different things, like podcasting. It was an experiment. And now, Laura, your show is a podcast as well as a radio show. So we're going to continue to experiment in these different realms, and it's an exciting time. So, if you're thinking about getting into it, I would say think about who you want your audience to be, and that might help dictate, where you want to focus your path. I mean, hopefully, the dream would be to reach as many people in as much a diverse way as possible. But I think that our audiences are sort of, there are different platforms depending on who you're trying to reach, and different techniques for storytelling. Like the younger generation likes this sort of POV and you sharing the story through your own lens, whereas like the long form investigative stories touch everyone. So yeah, maybe think about who you want your audience to be, and that maybe helps with how you want to focus your storytelling path.
Great. And Camille, how about you?
I would say, like, I wasn't hired at all to do environmental journalism or climate change journalism. So if you push, I just read a ton of books, and I, educated myself. I did this training on how to cover climate change. So it became clear, I think, to the people I work with that I was a good person to send there and to do those stories, because I had the knowledge. So you really have to look and read, and like we already said, but you don't have to be an environmental or science journalist to pitch a story. I think there's so many topics. I think in the next few years, everybody's, whether you're doing in politics or, many different things, even economy, finances, is going to be talking, about climate change. I think it's just something that's happening in the world. So there's no escaping it. So everybody should, I think everybody should really start looking at, the facts and knowing everything about what's happening, because it will touch every topic possible and imaginable in the near future.
Great. And we only have about 5 minutes left on the panel. So I was hoping that everyone could just go around and in a short 1 minute, give us, kind of your final thoughts and what you want our audience to take away from this panel on environmental journalism, starting maybe with you, Laura.
Well, I guess what I'd like everybody to take away is that this is a critical topic for every single person in the world. It doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter whether you're wealthy. In fact, it probably matters more whether you're poor. It's going to touch you, it's going to reach you, it's going to affect you. So by all means, don't take my word for it. Don't take Johanna's, don't take Camille's. As we said before, read everything, listen to everything, watch everything, inform yourself as much as you can so that you have the best grasp you possibly can of what the situation really is, and learn as much of the science as you can, because there's so much more great science journalism now that actually does break it down and make it something that you can really understand well. And then use that knowledge to be an activist, to talk to other people, to do whatever you think needs to be done to help push the whole thing forward. And if you feel strongly about it, to make a difference when it comes to climate change, because it is the #1 issue for all of us for now and well into the future.
How about you, Johanna?
First of all, that I loved this conversation, and every time I get to talk to other people thinking about this space, I always get so much out of it. And the fact that we're talking to many of you in the film industry is exciting. I think one of the biggest light bulb moments for me in the past year was this idea of entry points and different entry points for people into the world of climate change and climate change activism, and doing something about climate change in your own backyard. And it doesn't have to be the traditional way. And if it's just making whatever you do, whether it's in your job or your daily life, finding a way to connect more people to climate change through conversation, through casual conversation. So, I mean, the fact that we're having this conversation with, in 10 years ago, such a two different industries, and we're bringing them together is really exciting for me. And, I'm looking forward to seeing how all of you find new entry points for people in this world.
Great. And your final thoughts, Camille?
Well, after this, there's not that much to say, but I would say, one thing that really helped with me is get to know the land, get to know the territory, get to know what's happening to your rivers, to your forests. Things are right near you. The glaciers, everything, we're all connected to the environment. Like, we can't live without it. So make sure you know exactly what's happening, next to your house, because in BC we are very much connected to the environment, and it's essential that we protect it, and that we think about the future, and that we adapt to what's coming towards us, because it's not a choice. We will have to face climate change. So I would say, get out there. I actually hate the word climate solution. I always think, climate action. Let's start doing things, and like we say, it could be something very small. And in the industry in the film industry, who do we want our heroes to be, and how they look like, and what do they do? And when I'm doing a story, that's what I'm looking at. Who am I going to talk to? What do they have to say? And it's important to shed light on the people that are actually making a difference and that are fighting every day. That would be my last few words.
Well, thank you for that. Those are all great last thoughts, and I think we're giving folks a lot to go away with. So I think that's time for us. I just want to thank all of you once again for joining this very, very important panel, and I want to thank our viewers for joining us too. This was such an informative conversation. I just want to personally thank you, because it's, you just learn every time you participate in something like this, and talk with folks who just have such a direct line to be reporting on the environment. So thank you all again for your time. And thank you again to our viewers.
Thank you. Good luck, Camille, getting back home.